I'd like to introduce you to Liv Ash. She is an attorney, a writer, a presenter, and has a company called, am I saying this right, Live Life Balance?
Yeah, Live Balance is the name of the company, and the tagline is Live Balanced, Breathe You.
Alrighty. Well, we all know what a crazy year 2020 is, and we just like Olivia to talk to us about it and how to help manage our emotions during this time as it's still kind of continuing into 2021. So you can take it away, Olivia. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it. First of all, everybody, thank you for joining me on what is typically the lunch hour. And with this hour, my hope for you is that you can sit back wherever you are, whether you're in your office, you're in a different office, you're at home in your pajamas, your business on the top, pajama bottoms at the bottom, whatever it might be. And my goal and my challenge for you as we go through this next hour or so is to listen, is to absorb, and is to make some time to take this time for you, because I'm going to go through my background to help you understand why I'm here talking to you during your lunch hour as part of your wellness program. It's the Health Point program. But just really I'm going to suggest to consider being open and accessible to thinking about things in your life that may apply as I talk about emotions, as I talk about a specific emotion of loneliness, because that's a major issue right now. And then what we can do to mitigate it and what it might look like in our life. I will say, first of all, that talking about emotions and talking about how we feel is not easy. That is okay. The research that I have done in the area is that the North American culture is pretty good at making sure that we perform and we have everything in a straight line and we're black and white. They're not so fantastic about making sure that we acknowledge and we make it okay to talk about how we feel. Now, as a health professional in my background, that's a dissonance, because you are there to do a job in your work, but you are a human being that's a biology and is a system of systems. And if that's not functioning well, it will come out in your work and in your relationships. And so the goal is, what can you do today, one small action to take care of yourself so that you can then take care of other people? And that's really our goal here. So now, that's my intro. So thank you for having me, first of all, Lisa, and those of you on the Health Point team. I'm going to go through a few, management things just to help everybody understand. Take a look at this. We have, according to this, 26 participants, including myself and other administrators. Now, for the most part, I'm going to go through a PowerPoint. I am going to also show you a worksheet that can be done mentally at any time of the day. But for those of you who like to see something visual and like to write down information, that should be a nice tool for you. I'm tactile myself, and so it's nice to have that, which is why I created it. So you'll see in the chat feature a hyperlink to that worksheet. I also sent it to Lisa so you can get access to it. That is a very simple worksheet I will address later in this presentation on taking actions to act upon how you're feeling, instead of just feeling it and then worrying about it, or just acknowledging how you're feeling and the emotional responses. So that is number one. That is available in the chat feature. That will take you to my website. The information that is on my website is about the particular research that I'm talking about. Hello, everybody. Ooh, we have some new people. Hi, everyone. My name is Liv Ash. Most people call me Liv. If you're just now joining, welcome. I'm going to close out of this program that keeps popping up here. Sorry, everybody. Okay, so that's the first thing. I see someone in the chat. Hi, hey. Okay, and if I have some time, I may take some questions at the end if you want to ask questions, but please also know there is no pressure to do so. I am fully aware that when we are talking about managing our emotional responses, it's like being in high school again and somebody says, hey, Jane, I need you to stand up and talk to, be the first person to do this. This is not high school. We're adults. If you want to ask a question, though, I'm happy to address it. I'm also happy to address it offline. You can always contact me and I'll give you that information as well. So let's get this party started here. I'm going to share my screen, but also one thing to note, this is being recorded. So if you have to hop off because you have something to do, completely understandable. As well, you can look at it later, or perhaps I go through some content that you're not familiar with. You just want to absorb it at a little bit later time. I also do a podcast, the Live Balanced podcast. And so sometimes individuals are better at listening to something while they're doing something else. Okay, good. Yep, there's the hyperlink to the document. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. There it is. We're going to share the whole screen, get this going here. Okay. You'll see two things here. Let's make this bigger. We're going to go through this presentation. How to manage emotional fatigue during pandemic times. And I would say, based on some recent research that I just updated, it is getting worse. The Zoom fatigue is tough. It's tough for me, and I'm a presenter by training, and I'm a teacher by training. But being on Zoom is hard, especially if you're someone like me and you're an extrovert. So let's talk about managing emotional fatigue. And I'm going to specifically start with first, who am I, so that you're wondering why in the world is this person talking to us. So that is me. My name, of course, is Liv Ash. Now, I'm talking to you as part of your wellness program. And just also remember, you have a wellness program through your employer. And if you haven't used it, as a former wellness program manager, take some time. I have to make myself do this. I have to schedule it to go in there and explore what resources there are, because there are individuals working to put that information there for you and others, and you never know what you might be able to access. For instance, I have had some neck pain recently, and we have a benefit through our program on neck and back care. And I finally went out and looked at it. And, you know, I've done this for my whole career, but it was still nice to be able to see someone else go through some new information about taking care of my neck and back. So I would encourage you to make sure that you are accessing HealthPoint. Ask Lisa and others on the team. You also have an EAP, which I'm going to mention now, and you'll hear me mention it later, because we're talking about managing emotions, and emotions can feel incredibly scary. So who am I and why am I here? My graduate work is in exercise science and well-being education. So I am presently in my full-time position. I'm Associate General Counsel. I'm an attorney for an Indianapolis-based company, and I do all kinds of things. I negotiate contracts, but most of my work is to do what I'm doing here for you, which is to educate our clients on law that applies to their employee benefit plans, including health plans and sometimes 401k plans. That is my full-time role. But because I have a background in exercise science and well-being education, I love it. That's what I went to school for. Law just came later in my career. So I am a licensed health phys ed and biology teacher. I've taught all grades. I typically teach older individuals, so that could be adults or young adults, because I'm also adjunct faculty at Indiana University. Now, when I talk about wellness program management, I spent 10 years in helping employers like your company implement their wellness programs and make them as successful as possible, and help with strategizing on how to communicate with the employees. So what is going to make you guys tick? That is how a wellness program should be designed. What are you responding to? About a year and a half ago, I founded Live Balanced. So this is my company, and at present it is growing. It is really a way for me to practice what I preach and teach about sharing content that I have learned and that I feel is important to share with others about mental health, about physical wellness, about spiritual wellness. I also share, it's a way for me to share my background. It's a resume type tool. So if you go out to Live Balanced, you'll see I also used to model, and I love fashion. So for me, it's a way to share who I am and what I can do and the color and everything that I love, so that people can understand living balanced is not a destination, it's a journey. So again, Associate General Counsel at my current company. I am faculty at Indiana University, and I teach undergraduates lifestyle wellness, nutrition, and history of physical education. And I'm a graduate of the Indiana McKinney School of Law downtown. So that is why I'm here. That's why I'm talking to you about what I'm talking about. And let us go on here to this last one on the thesis. Now, did I plan to write a thesis that would take me an entire year to complete? No, I did not. I did not plan to do that, but because law school requires you to do a doctoral thesis, I decided to do something that mattered to me from a wellness perspective that would affect attorneys, because I had just been through 4 years of law school. And so what I did is I spent a year and I did research on lawyers and loneliness, specifically the emotion of loneliness, because lawyers ranked as the most lonely of professionals, followed very closely by doctors, dentists, and engineers. So it's okay, first of all, I'm going to say it now and I'll say it many times, to say that you felt lonely, because we all do, as it's part of the human experience. That is a chicken in a field, a solitary chicken in the middle of an Indiana field. So one of my hobbies, I'm a cyclist, and I was riding my bike with my best friend of 20 years, and I saw that chicken and I took a picture of it, because there are individuals who feel like that single solitary chicken. If you know anything about chickens, they are a social species, as are humans. Humans are social species. So they need to be together and in relationship to feel balanced and feel better. Right now, pandemic, first of all, our being at home, not being able to physically be with other people like we would like, our capitalistic culture, all of those things do contribute to individuals feeling more lonely than they should. So now, why does this matter? Well, I redid my thesis recently and updated it for submission with some new research that had come out during the pandemic. And what we're finding is that individuals are highly lonely. So a survey by Cigna, 2018, it was 45% of the American workers in this survey said that they were highly lonely. That's bumped up about 7 points in the last year. And we're seeing a trend. And when we talk about loneliness, we're like, it's a soft, yeah, it's kind of soft, but it's real because you know it when you feel it. So how do we measure it and what exactly is it? We're going to talk about that and the other emotions that go along with it. Because I believe that loneliness is the seed from which so many other mental health challenges are worsened, and it kind of sprouts and can grow unless you take action to mitigate it. So in the next 45 minutes or so, maybe 40 minutes, depending upon how we go here, this is today's agenda. As you sit there, let's think about how emotions affect our well-being. We'll do a very basic biology review, as in a one-slide biology review. And then what is loneliness in particular? So this is the emotion that I've done the most research on. So what is it? What does it look like? And who is lonely? We'll talk about personality and loneliness. Is there a relationship? Managing our emotions at work and some strategies to mitigate it, both from an employer perspective and then you as an individual, because the only thing you can control is yourself at all times, 24/7. And my mother told me once, she has many good phrases, and I believe, if I don't mess it up here, that it's none of my business what you think of me, and it's none of your business what I think of you. Now that may sound a little harsh, but the point there is that we can only control our own actions, our own emotional responses, though it is valid if someone does something that creates a response in us. What that is it's a message. And we're getting 1,000 messages every single day, and they're all interacting. So I'm going to start this with asking some questions for you. And 10 minutes ago, when I started the presentation, I said, my encouragement is to have you think about situations in your present work at work, particularly since this is done through work, but also in your personal life. I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, and it may churn up some emotions. It may pop some light bulbs on, so jot it down, just note it. Don't judge it. That's the number one thing that happens is we feel an emotion and we judge it immediately. We're not good enough. It's a shame response. I shouldn't feel this way. That person's making me do something. Those are all reactionary type of responses, but emotions are okay because they're there to help us. So when is the last time you felt part of a group? Maybe it's worsened. You ate a meal at a table with people. If you're at home, hopefully you're able to do this if you have a family. If not, that may be something that's lacking and you wish you had it. When's the last time you had a heart-to-heart conversation with a friend? How many really good friends do you have that you can talk to? Or you shared a joyful activity, and that is italicized on purpose. It sparked joy within you. A lot of times we will go through the motions and do activities that suck the life out of us. That is not a joyful activity. You ate at your desk, you worked late, you worked in bed, whatever those situations might be. So far, things might be checking boxes here. What about internal dialogue in your head? Or sometimes people will say these things to you. No one understands my position. I really need to talk to somebody, but I don't know who to talk to. I can't fix it. There's too much to do and I can't fix it. I am a fixer by nature and by environmental upbringing. That's one of my challenges. I tend to be a perfectionist. I tend to think it has to be right. And if it's got to be done, I can fix it and I should be the one to fix it. Not always the case, but at least I have been able to learn that and acknowledge it and what happens. You feel overwhelmed. All the feelings are going to start here. You feel overwhelmed. You feel helpless. You feel alone. You feel lonely. Or you wish you had better relationships. And this one here at the end is going to get to the I'm shy, anxious, fearful, tired, whatever it might be. Some of this may resonate, some of it may not be. Maybe this isn't resonating for you as much, but you know someone and you can see it resonating for them. Now, at work context, if we're managing emotions at work, when's the last time you had to make a difficult decision for the company at someone's expense, your expense or someone else? You felt that you managed everyone and everything. You were drowning in paperwork, maybe meetings. You felt alone in your role without support and you didn't know how to help yourself. These things are common and come up on a regular basis, not just for management, but also for individuals who are not in a management role, because we are each responsible, especially working from home virtually, to get our tasks done. And we have a lot to manage, even if it's not necessarily people. And for those of you who are managing people during Zoom land, Zoom world during the pandemic, that can be incredibly frustrating and it creates emotional responses. Here's that biology review I talked to you about. Emotions 101, and I truly am not going to go into too much biology here. Everything that happens with your emotions starts in your brain. And people will call this the lizard brain. You'll hear these different things. There may be those of you listening who have background in this, but please know that I'm going through a very basic anatomy and connection making, because my goal in this presentation is starting with the simple, most basic things that you can do where you are right now to begin to manage how you feel and take action. So the limbic system, as you'll see here on the right, is composed of different organs. I'm going to focus on the amygdala, which is the center for emotions. And I'm specifically going to start with what it does here. It is your response coordinator. So it's the one that says, uh-oh, something's happened. I need to get the troops in the body and all the systems, and we're going to respond to this particular situation. Maybe it's a threat. Maybe it's a happy response. Typically, your amygdala is responsible for the really core, strong anger and fear responses. Sometimes you'll hear it called the fight, flight, and freezing is actually a response that has now been gaining popularity, because sometimes individuals, if there's a threat, you're in a meeting and someone gets snarky and says something personally attacking, you may want to fight back and have an anger response. You may want to get the heck out of that room and flight so that you can manage your emotional response. Or you may, quite frankly, freeze and you feel like you cannot talk about it. And that is okay. Those responses are part of your body's responses to a threat. okay? And when we see both the amygdala, when it's functioning well, it's there to alert you. So, we're going to go back to basic biology before we have all the structures of corporate world, and we are there. They say fight or flight, like a tiger's running at you. Truly, it is hey, something's going on in my environment that I'm getting this response, and I think it's unsafe, or maybe I need to be cautious. Except that our body is still responding as if it were a saber-toothed tiger or someone threatening us and our family. The same way it's responding that way in a meeting when someone attacks us, raises their voice, or maybe they're silent and that really annoys us and we have a response. So our body is going to physically respond the same way with that flood of hormones. It's going to flood us with cortisol, which is your stress hormone. The thing about the amygdala, it's called fear learning. If you're conditioned and based upon the situation, your amygdala will have a response based upon a fear. And the thing is, there may not actually be a physical threat to you, but just thinking about a situation that is bad is going to cause that same chemical response in your body, which is why our thinking is so essential. So hopefully this gives you a nice background on our emotions as we continue to talk, and I get down to the root of many things that cause us anger and fear, and that's being alone. For some individuals, it will lead into depression. For some individuals, it will lead into taking action. For some individuals, it will lead into having very strong, almost anger responses. Here's some fun words for this morning at lunchtime. So what are these words here for? Dissatisfaction, perception. Take a look at these words. What do these things mean? Well, these are words that have been used to describe loneliness throughout research. Now, the subject of loneliness is what we call a qualitative measure. That means it's subjective and is experienced differently by every single person. However, because of the pandemic, we are seeing more research being done on loneliness because it was quoted as being one of the next public health crises, along with depression and anxiety. And I believe, based on my research, that loneliness, like I said, is that seed. And what is it? Well, it was said by a genetics researcher, one of the most toxic environmental conditions we can possibly encounter. That's a really strong response. Emily Dickinson, the poet, said that it was something to be skirted because it was disastrous, and it could be, you just avoid loneliness and talking about it. Unfortunately, she had a very unhappy life as a poet, but she had such painful loneliness and painfully shy that she died young, but that not addressing it is not what you're supposed to do. We need to address it, and we address it by acting, because loneliness is actually one of these responses that I talked about that causes you to begin to think, oh man, something's wrong. When you begin to feel lonely, that is your mind's way of saying, I need to reach out, because loneliness is correlated with a lot of health issues we'll talk about here. So these words have been used to describe it. It's, like I said, it's kind of squishy, but we know it. When you feel it, you know it, and you know how it makes you feel. Real quickly, loneliness and the accompanying anxiety and depression that can stem from it. And sometimes if we get anxious or we get fearful because we're feeling like we're lonely and we're going to be alone maybe for our whole lives or something like, I'm taking it to all the extremes. Each person watching has likely dealt with it at some level. Loneliness is different from social isolation. So loneliness, like I said, is a qualitative measure. That is something that is subjective to you and me. Social isolation in research, quite frankly, is the number of social interactions you have in a network of people. So that's a quantitative measure. Olivia has 15 people she's seen in the last week, and her network is a core of 6. So she's not socially isolated. Now, the thing about these two is that they're synergistic, which means they play off each other, and it can be magnified. So it also means that the quality of someone's relationships, whether it's work relationship and work interaction, or it's a personal, is the single clearest predictor of physical health, longevity, and quality of life. Now, I just talked to you about our basic emotion response center, and that's in our brain. And I just told you that thinking about situations will cause that same response. So I teach an intro course in wellness, and the first thing I start teaching is stress response. Stressors can be good and bad, but they cause us to have that chemical reaction. Feeling lonely and feeling angry and fearful also causes that chemical same cascade. We know what that feels like. Each one of us understands what fear and anger feels like. That is our body preparing us and telling something's wrong. We need to take action to make it better. But the thinking has a direct effect on that physical health, longevity, and quality of life. So these two are related. They're not the same, though. They're not the same in research. Now, you can feel horribly lonely and have a lot of friends and be in the middle of a dinner and inside be crushed. You can be totally isolated and be perfectly fine and have a low loneliness score. So what is the difference? Well, let's look at what loneliness actually is. And I distilled the research here. It is possible to be isolated without feeling lonely and to be lonely without being isolated. So if you think about it like an iceberg, there's a heck of a lot under the surface. We all know, especially if you're in professions, again, I said the business article that I started this research is that lawyers, doctors, physicians, and engineers, that's how they rank on feeling the loneliest. Okay, so why is that? Well, there's a lot under the surface. Those professions tend to have high expectations on perfectionism. You can't make a mistake. And then when you get into lawyers and doctors, you may have someone's life on the line. That's a lot of pressure. And that is something only a few people truly understand. Now, why are people lonely? Well, physical isolation and lack of companionship. What are we talking about? We are in the middle of a pandemic where we are seeing more physical isolation and lack of companionship. Maybe it's relationships take investment of time. And if we can't see someone, we have got to use other paths to connect with them and stay connected. Sometimes for individuals, it's a lack of a useful role in society, or if we drill that down to you and me, is your role at work? Do you feel like you're useful in your role? You may feel lonely because your job and what you're doing there's a dissonance between that and what you want to do. And that's where we get into what loneliness is. Now, isolation is separation, as I mentioned. It's being separated physically from someone, access to service, community involvement. And the more that you're separated, sometimes that loneliness can increase. So what is it? This is an individual, so this is Liv's personal, subjective sense of lacking those things to the extent that I want or need them. So loneliness is that difference between what I want and need and what I have or what I think I have. And that's where your brain's so important in that amygdala and your emotional responses. Because if I am not practicing, let's say, gratefulness and mindfulness and looking at something and getting feedback from people, I may think I am super lonely and I don't have what I need, but maybe I do have what I need. I just need to make a tweak. Or I really want to be in a better romantic relationship, but maybe I don't feel like I'm good enough, or maybe I don't know how to talk to someone, or maybe I want my work relationship to be better with my manager, but I'm so shy. And it's a lonely feeling, and it's okay to feel that way. It is, again, an alarm to tell us something's going on. So, excuse me, how does this feel? Well, loneliness is complex, and we're learning more about it in research. And from a research perspective, everybody, loneliness research is relatively new, like late 70s. There was a book, Robert Weiss, called Loneliness, and he talked about two types of loneliness, two major types, emotional loneliness and social. So each one of us, if you think of it on a Likert scale or a gradient, we can be feeling both of these at any one time in different strengths. Depending upon what's going on with us and whether we're taking care of our physical and our mental health. Now, emotional loneliness is this want of intimacy. You want an intimacy. Humans are programmed, primates as well, other primates, we're social creatures, it is essential for us to have intimacy and be able to share intimate things, not just romantic intimacy, but intimacy of sharing ourselves with someone else we trust who will listen and give us feedback. If that is lacking, you are likely to feel emotional loneliness, and that can be displayed as anxiety and depression. We see this in the research. This has changed recently, where more people are expressing emotional loneliness as feeling depressed, okay? They feel disconnected. They need that intimacy. Now, you can have a lot of friends, but you really know that everybody needs an intimate relationship. They also need a romantic, intimate relationship, as that is one of the most important protective factors to long life, is to have a life partner. Now, social loneliness is going to be this absence of people in your network. You may feel aimless boredom or some anxiety. So this might be you have an intimate relationship with a partner, but you may need more friends to help you be feeling as whole as you want to be. So at work, this could look like being involved in groups, feeling like you have support from your manager, feeling you have support from your coworkers, being given the opportunity to use your strengths, to develop your strengths. So from a wellness perspective, with your Health Point program, with your EAP, this is something where you may be able to create activities within your wellness programming to allow individuals to learn from one another, to increase their social skills, as well as reducing any type of social loneliness. Because when individuals are able to express themselves in a safe environment, they're going to perform better. They're going to feel better about themselves because that fear response, that fear and anger response we talked about, is lessened. And they can learn how to replace the fear response with a better, this isn't as fearful as I thought it would be. Now, the main thing though is people do have to take action. So when we talk about things of loneliness and isolation, anxiety that goes along with it, and depression, again, anxiety, depression, anxiety is going to cause us to, your fear is part of anxiety. Anger may be part of feeling depressed. I am not a professional in depression, but with my background in wellness, I know enough to understand that those core emotions are going to be displayed both in anxiety and depression and loneliness. I'm talking about a lot, but again, my goal here is, as we're going along, we're about halfway through, absorb what I'm saying and just reflect without judging on yourself. So who do we see as typically lonely? Well, guess what, everybody? It is getting pervasive. Generally speaking, we actually see younger than 25 and older than 65 in research having the highest scores on feeling lonely. So these are responses to questions such as, I don't feel like my ideas are heard. I don't have someone to talk to. I wish that I had a better relationship. Those are the types of questions on this measurement scale that I did in my research. What we typically see here, there's some women typically may report feeling lonely more than men, but it doesn't necessarily mean that women are more lonely than men. Women by nature, their brains are different, as you all know. Men and women are different, and women typically will talk more and report more than men. But in the most recent loneliness scores, it was about equal. The more educated you are, you typically will feel more lonely. Single, divorced, widowed typically feel more lonely than those in relationships. If you've been separated, it likely increases your loneliness score. Living alone, being childless, poor health. Here's the interesting interaction about this in research. Loneliness causes poor health. Poor health doesn't cause loneliness. So what we see here is that, again, I told you, everything that cascades through our body, like a Plinko game from, Price is Right, it all cascades. When we have an emotional response in our amygdala, that is going to cause cortisol to go up, epinephrine, norepinephrine, to prepare us to deal with something. If that is not immediately reduced, like it's designed to be, and it's consistent, it causes and strains the rest of our systems, circulatory, respiratory, endocrine systems. So how we think matters. That's the most important thing, and our bodies will follow. Also in research, typically if someone doesn't, religion is a challenging word because spirituality might be a better one. So typically if you believe that there's something greater than you, you're less likely to feel as lonely. So this is our wellness wheel. And I want to say this in context as we transition over to talking about, okay, we've defined what loneliness is. We understand that we have a biology response. What's this going to look like in my day-to-day life? And then we'll wrap up with some solutions and ways that you can do something about it. When I teach my students in wellness class, we talk about the wellness wheel. Now, a wheel's function is to do what? A wheel's function is to roll, right? Well, imagine reducing or eliminating any one piece of the pie here. And I know who I'm talking to. So this, it will not function well. So we have got to address all aspects of our wellness. And we've identified generally 6. And when we talk about emotional responses, we're focusing on our emotional health, our mental health, and to an extent, our physical health and social there as well. But generally speaking, if we think we don't have what we need and we're constantly pining over what we want and there's some discrepancy, that exhausts us, not only mentally, but physically. So these are 6 dimensions of well-being. Now, I talked to you about this earlier. How does loneliness affect the body? Well, sometimes we want to run away. Sometimes we worry and mull over it, creating anxiety. Sometimes we run away or we give in, and that begins to go into depressive symptoms, which is a completely different mental health challenge. And then sometimes we just get angry. We get angry. We feel like, why isn't something happening for us? Why is this work situation why do they always make fun of me? What is going on? And the thing is that emotional amygdala response is alarming you, but we have to take action and responsibility for stepping away for just a moment and figuring out what's really causing it. Then we can begin to take actions to make it a little bit better. So when it comes to being lonely, feeling the anxiety and depression that can flower from it, here in research, these are the types of physical and mental ailments that are associated with high loneliness scores in research. This is one of the reasons why a former US Surgeon General said it is going to be the next public health crisis if we don't deal with it. Look at that list of physical responses. And remember, I showed you our brain and the chemicals. What we perceive and how we think, as well as the things that actually happen to us, are going to cause that cascade of emotions. Now, we see, I believe one of the research statistics, if I'm not mistaken, is that high loneliness or chronic loneliness over a period of time can be just as detrimental to being obese on our body systems or smoking regularly, because it causes such angst. And I say angst, and I'm personifying our body. But again, that's how I teach about the body. You have one body, it's like a car. You got to take care of it. So we have increased risk of, look at that, stroke, high blood pressure, chronic pain, poor sleep. Sleeping is a big issue I've seen on headlines, is that the longer the pandemic happens, we're seeing individuals having sleep challenges. There's higher loneliness happening, so I'm not surprised about that. Mentally, we see increased risk of depressive symptoms, even suicidal thoughts and anxiety that are associated with loneliness in the research. And there's so much more to be done. But again, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to ask you to think about, since we're here, you're taking your time during this break. This is provided to you by your employer as part of your wellness education and your wellness program, because they came, and I'm very honored they came to ask me to help you understand how could this be affecting your everyday at work, whether you're Zooming from home or you're in the office or you're part-time. Well, we see loneliness being associated with inability to mentally think clearly, focusing on tasks. Look at the anger, deadlines, negative thinking. This is all associated with emotional pain. Loneliness is painful. It's people will say they're lonely and sad, different from clinical depression, but loneliness is painful. And some of the research I read, there was a lot of responses about people feeling just this pain and aching. Now, do any of you see you ever feel this during the workday, or you get home and then you finally feel it flood over you after you've gotten all your work done? It's okay, it happens. I've gone through and learned how to recognize if something's consistently happening, then that means I need to be doing something about it. Why are people lonely? Well, when we look at group dynamics, theories of loneliness, culture, how we're raised. I talked about the North American culture. This can be culture even from macro, from a North American, to micro, meaning how you were raised in your family and what was acceptable and not acceptable to feeling. Whether you're a male or a female, men are supposed to be strong and women are all emotional. No, you have to think about those kinds of mushrooming on where could it be coming from? How we think. There's theories on that some individuals are more predisposed to being pessimistic, personality characteristics. Some people are just more shy. That tends to inflate the loneliness scores, but that doesn't mean that they can't have improvement to find healthiness and happiness and reduce loneliness, but it does require individuals stepping out of themselves, is what I like to say. And then our past emotional experiences, if we've had any sort of trauma, that's going to have a big effect on our ability to trust and open up to talk about how we feel. There is an EAP offered through your wellness program, I understand, and that is there for your benefit. And calling, there's no harm in calling. It's like when I was doing a PSA on masks for health professionals. You know, it's not a big ask to wear a mask. It's not a big step to make a call for an EAP, especially when it's confidential. You never know what you might learn. Now, types of loneliness, we have communicative, ethical. These are just some of them. Some individuals have a very difficult time communicating well. It could be a function of many biological systems, personality, how they're raised, injuries. It doesn't mean that they can't improve their ability to talk to someone so they reduce how they feel lonely or establish healthy relationships. In the general population, research shows that when we see loneliness, again, this is the seed, I believe, and it starts with this and it can blossom into feeling anxious, boredom, depressed. Then we get fear and angry because we're feeling these things. So how do we manage this? Well, some people in general shy. Hypervigilance is one I am challenged with. Hypervigilance is often a side effect of post-traumatic stress. In lawyers in particular, in my research, we see a hypervigilance. So we're always ready to look out for the next threat and think about the worst case scenario. That is not how you're supposed to live your everyday. So turning that off is tough. Okay, so if you're in a profession that requires high attention to detail and almost a perfectionism, you may feel a hypervigilance, which is increased heart rate. You don't really trust a lot of people. You want to make sure everything's fine, and you have a very high sensitivity to everything. Now, in highly trained and highly educated individuals, what we see in particular are these characteristics. Are you independent? Are you competitive? None of these things are bad, by the way. Hypervigilant. I'm trained to argue and parse syntax, so I can argue with you about all the words all day long because that's what I'm trained to do, except I don't need to be doing that in my relationships, okay? So that's one of those things we have got to learn strategies to stop and reframe and move on. What is driving this? Well, right now we're in a pandemic, as I've mentioned, but let's take a look at some of these other factors that are driving loneliness. We have self-imposed stigmas. I can't talk about how I feel. It is just not acceptable. We've had a lot of, side note, since I do regulatory law, we've had a lot of legal regulations that are bolstering and buffering and helping to support mental health in EAPs and your benefit plans and making sure we protect people's information. So this is a big deal. Look at the other factors. Perceiving that you're weak, maybe you're embarrassed, maybe you don't know who to talk to. Find one trusted person you can talk to. And a work situation, I won't tread on what I don't know, but generally speaking, there are individuals designated that you should be able to talk to. And if you don't feel like you can talk to someone at your workplace about what's going on with your work life, call it the EAP. By law, they have to maintain all of your records as confidential. And if they don't, that's a different situation. Now, here's some well-being barriers. We are working in isolation. One of the things we're seeing with Zoom fatigue, we're at home, well, we can work all the time. I'm totally guilty of this. Sometimes I just get in the zone and I'm working and it's 2 in the morning and that's just not healthy. We view others as competition instead of letting them be them and controlling what we can. Look at the other ones there. We're not willing to mentor people. We have intense workloads. So what can you do to feel less lonely as we wrap up here in the next 15 or so minutes? I like to keep things simple, guys. One thing that I realized about myself when I was in grad school, they put us on this spectrum and they're like, are you a researcher or are you like a people person? I am straight over here in the people person. I understand and know how to do the research, but I'm from a big family. I'm a teacher by nature, I say, and a teacher by training. I just really want to help people take complex things and make them simple. So I tried to design this with my own company in the worksheet I'm going to go over. Let's keep it simple here. And you got to start with one. You got to start with what you know, which is yourself. And if you don't know yourself, that's a great place to start. Watch. If you're trained in your particular professions, you're trained to look for details. Make some notes. See what's going on. Make yourself the project because you're worth it. So we need to cultivate wisdom, consistent exercise and sacred time, and then creating positive friendships and talking. In research, the #1 way to reduce loneliness and also reduce anxiety and some of that depression that goes along with it is to talk. Cognitive behavioral therapy, otherwise known as talk therapy or counseling. You can get that with your EAP and they can match you with someone. That is a great way to start reducing feelings of loneliness and the other feelings. I'm angry, I am super hyper responsive to everything. I don't like what's going on here. If we don't talk through them, we're much more likely to ruminate. And if you rewind, that's going to cause that same cascade in our brain of all of those stress hormones. What does it mean to cultivate wisdom? Well, in 2018, there was a paper published, and this is really cool. We all know someone in our life, I hope, that we would say is wise. Wisdom is kind of like loneliness in that it is a group of behaviors where we are learning to not judge. We're learning to practice optimism and just sort of, this is what it is. What can I do about it? Take action. Willingness to listen to people. So wisdom, cultivating your wisdom is sort of, I think of it as physically stepping back, looking at the situation before launching into judgment. We've all done that. Now, as a health and physical health professional, also, you've got to take care of your chassis in your body. So now we know that exercise is one of the #1 ways to reduce stress and anxiety, because what it does is, I think of it as scrubbing bubbles. It goes through your body and it will help remove and level out that cortisol, level out the sugars in your body and the fats. So exercise doesn't have to be going to the gym. It does not have to be lifting weights. It doesn't have to be having the newest thing. Exercise is walking. We are bipeds. We're designed to walk. Start with walk. Take a 5-minute break. Do something, because what that will do is it'll immediately pull you out of a situation where you may be feeling a strong emotional response, and it will help you reframe. Create sacred time and positive friendships. So some of you may find it difficult to create friendships, and that's okay. That could be a function of just how you were raised or fear or things that only you know. Maybe you're shy. It doesn't mean you can't make friends, but it does mean that you will have to step outside of yourself and try something. And that if it doesn't go the way you want, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you try again. So where do you start? I call this caring for your 6, those 6 dimensions of wellness I talked to you about. Reducing loneliness and managing our emotions, meaning getting outside of ourselves. This means we have to take action. We literally have to take action. And I talked at the beginning about you are responsible for what you can control. And that's all you really are responsible for when it comes to your own emotional and mental health. Now, name the problem. You got to say, yeah, I feel lonely, or I'm angry today, or I'm really tired, or I didn't do so well in this. How can I make it better? Without judging. And that's the hardest thing for us. You can see the other items listed there on talking to someone during work tasks. But what I wanted to do is, we had posted, this is an exercise I created, and you can use this worksheet. And like I said, this worksheet here is really, it's a tangible worksheet if you're a paper person, but I try to do this mentally. I've learned how to do this mentally. Since we know loneliness is reduced by talking to people, and we know that we have to create awareness. Let's start with ourselves. You ask and you act. Okay, this is a very simple exercise and it does not take much. You don't have to do it perfectly. It doesn't have to be some big issue. And it helps you practice non-judgment. It may also help you reframe and understand a particular, let's say, work situation where you had a conflict with someone because you see something differently. One of you is upset, one of you angry, one of you just freezes. So first, ask yourself how you feel. So this is your emotional inventory. And I put the little happy faces. Why do you feel that way? There's a very good reason. Well, John said something that I just went off the hook. You know, I disagree with how he thinks how this should be done. All right, so your anger. Okay, so you're feeling angry. That's okay. You're feeling angry because that's a natural response. All right, it means something may not be right, but you got to figure out how you can talk about it constructively so that, you know, HR is not overwhelmed by individuals just reacting and not managing their own emotions. So why do you feel that way? Number two, you got to connect. Who can you talk to? Do you have someone who is a trusted, non-judgmental person? In the workplace, that may be challenging. You may have a friend, but I would encourage you to talk to someone outside. Maybe you have a counselor, therapist, really good friend, whoever it might be, or go to HR and the resources provided by your wellness program and talk to somebody. That's what they're there for. We're supposed to spend a third of our waking hours at work. That's why we have employee benefit programs. Then nutrition, and this is where I go into how can you better balance your diet? So what is one thing you can do for yourself to take care of your body? Maybe that's drinking a glass of water. Maybe that's having an orange. Maybe that's not having 5 Cokes in a day, but only having 4. How do you balance your exercise? What is one small action you can do to move? Maybe that's getting up out of your chair after 5 Zoom meetings and doing 10 squats. Raising your arms over your head, that will flush your system. Something is better than nothing. And then lastly, what can you do right now? List one action. So you learned that I was angry, but I'm going to get a glass of water. I'm going to take a 3-minute walk. I'm going to do a few squats. I'm just going to move my body. I'm going to breathe. Breathing interrupts that stress cycle, by the way. And then I'm going to take this one small action. Maybe I'm going to write down how I'm feeling, or I'm going to write down why that made me angry. Or maybe you just do it in your head. So this ask and act exercise is very simple, but it can be that interruption in something that's very, very stressful. From a business perspective, businesses do this through their wellness program, okay? Cultivating purpose and meaning. This is often done at leadership, and what we find and what I found with wellness program management is we got to have leaders on board and people who are cultivating purpose and meaning in your job. If you don't feel that in your particular role, there's ways, that's a way to tell you, hey, what can I do differently? Focus on building relationships, especially with those who they're synergistic to make maybe a product better, get a deadline met. Mentor the less experienced individuals in your organization. They probably feel lonely and are scared to ask someone who has a lot of experience. So it's a matter of being willing to mentor and then them asking. And so perhaps activities to bring people together like that will be beneficial for the system. Providing constructive and not critical feedback. Constructive feedback is, or critical feedback. Jane, you totally messed up on this paper again. You didn't get these things right. I'm literally, in law, it's totally different, but let's say you didn't get measurements right. That's not helping anybody. It's putting someone in a position of judging when it could be, hey, I noticed that this is incorrect. Let's see if we can apply a new thing. Can you please revise it? That is constructive feedback. And if you don't know how to do it, then maybe let me help you do it. That's the difference between constructive and critical feedback. Critical is going to get that anger response in the office, and it's going to have a whole emotional management that may derail someone. Constructive feedback may be painful, but there's solutions along with it. And then practicing active listening skills. I've given a presentation similar, and I've worked with a company, a benefits company, on managing emotional responses and practicing with empathy. Active listening is incredibly important. So what does that mean? Well, as we end here, first of all, let's actively listen and be empathetic with ourselves. I've just talked about a lot of emotional things, and maybe it makes you uncomfortable. That's okay. That means it's a place to start. In the workplace, active listening, empathy and sympathy are different. If you don't know the difference, generally speaking, empathy means you can feel what someone else is feeling. You typically can sense it, and you could put yourself in the position that person is in and understand where they may be. Sympathy says, oh, okay, I see what's happening. I'm sorry it's happening to you, but I'm not going to, but I don't take any further action to actually feel as you feel. Now, empathy, I'm highly empathetic. It can be very tiring. So empaths generally have to have some protective mechanisms. But if we begin to practice with some empathy in the workplace, so I'm a high empathy person, but maybe you're low empathy. Maybe you just don't care and you know someone's having a bad day. You're sympathetic to the situation. Well, asking questions, especially if you're in management, can help you understand someone better. Taking time, an active listening course, quality time, or putting yourself in their shoes or their position. If you're a low empathy person. If you're a high empathy person, it's important to refine your words and be specific about how you're talking to someone. This is a very good exercise for those in HR who are talking to a lot of people. Sometimes we have to be silent and just practice nonverbal skills and listen to someone. So these are really important strategies we are doing every day in the workplace. We may not realize what we're doing, but we're doing this. Now, as we end, we have a few minutes. This is information, that's me, of course, and you can contact me. This information will be accessible. So I have videos, I do podcasts, particularly on loneliness. I have a Live Balance podcast where I talk about things like authenticity. I'll be going into more loneliness details soon. Basically lifestyle wellness type things. You can access the podcast and any of the other information on my website. But with a few minutes remaining, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to go on a limb and I'm going to ask if anybody has any questions with the last few minutes remaining. And thank you to those of you who have remained. It's great. This is what I want to see. If you want to ask a question in the chat feature, go ahead. If not, that's okay too. There's a lot of information. Let me see here. Make sure I covered all my bases. This recording will be available on your intranet. We're going to get that taken care of. If you want to look at it, you have access to the worksheet. Any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? Clarifications? No? You can always contact me on the website. Like I said, you can, my email's there. Lisa, anything else? Anybody else? Otherwise, I think we're good. So thank you for your time, everybody. I hope this was helpful. I hope you found one thing that you can do today to take care of yourself so that you can then take care of other people. Good luck with everything and take care of yourselves during the pandemic. Hey, you are welcome, all of you. Thanks for the content and you're welcome for it. I hope that it's helpful and keep trucking along.
Thanks, Olivia.
Hey, you are welcome. Bye, everybody.